We are beautifully, melanated.
Welcome to the Beautifully Melanated podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Sarah, and I'm here with my co-hosts.
I'm Kay. Welcome to this episode. We missed you last week. We hope you've had a good half-term break. If you're celebrating the Jubilee, we hope you're enjoying yourselves. It was a much-needed break, but we did miss you, so very happy to be back.
And I'm Karen. And I'd just like to start by saying I've had some wonderful feedback from my hairdresser, a very good hairdresser she is too. And she is a listener who expressed her just gratitude, really, for the podcast that we present. I was really taken aback because she expressed how much she enjoyed it and how uplifting she found it, and how helpful it was to discuss some of these topics with her family. So I just wanted to say thank you for being such a committed listener. And that brings me on to today's topic, which is loss. So I'll start by saying that someone told me a long time ago, or I think I might have read it somewhere, that if you have pets for your children, so if your children have a pet, they will understand the life cycle and they will be able to cope better with loss when if that occurs in their lives. So during the lockdown, we bought some rabbits, two rabbits. Two boys, which is very helpful. Didn't want a boy and a girl. And my daughter really, she really bonded with them. Like I say, it was during lockdown and she was quite lonely, and it was a really difficult time. So the rabbits were really, part of her well-being, really. And they were just a joy to have. So 2 years later, we still had the rabbits, we kept them. But one day, one of them burrowed under the fence into next door's garden and actually died of fright. It wasn't that next door's dog mauled it hadn't, but just the shock of seeing a dog, because they are prey, animals of prey, it just died, like its heart gave out. Anyway, as you can imagine, my daughter was absolutely mortified. She was just beside herself. And to be fair, so was I, because what I didn't realize was that I would actually become so attached to an animal. I'd never had a pet before. And sometimes, when I hear people say, my dog's died or something, I might have kind of, belittled it. But now, having lost a pet myself, I completely get it, because you become, like I say, so attached. And it was such a cute animal. It was, so it was devastating for all of us. Anyway, the reason I'm telling you this story is because, yes, she experienced loss, the loss of a pet. But in all honesty, I don't think anything can actually prepare you for the loss of someone who you really love, a close family member or a close friend. I don't think there is a way of preparing for that, if I'm honest. I think everybody experiences loss and grief very differently. I think that there is no right or wrong way, really, to grieve. And like I say, I think everyone's experience is different. So thinking back to when my dad passed away, I was in my early 20s. And I just remember waking up the next day and thinking, why is the world still going on as if nothing's happened? Like, don't they know my dad's dead? Like, I couldn't believe that people were going to work. It was busy outside. The world had continued, even though my dad wasn't there. It felt as if my world had stopped. My whole world had just stopped, and yet life kept going. And that was a real shock to me. I had to adjust and think, actually, yeah, life does go on. My mum obviously took it really badly, that it was just such a difficult time for her, the whole family really. But I just remember my mum grieving, and for such a long time. You know, he was her life partner. And that was just really hard. So could I have prepared myself for the loss of my father through having a pet? No, I don't think so. Or could anything have prepared me for that? No. But what I did realize is that life does go on. And I think you learn to live without the person. You never forget them, but you find a way of coping, and you find a way of just keeping things moving without them being there. And so, yeah, I'm talking about loss. It could be of a family member, of a loved one, bereavement of any kind, really. So I wanted to know, ladies, what are your thoughts? Sarah, do you have any thoughts on this subject?
Thanks, Karen. Yes, I do. Before I kind of go into this, I wanted to put a trigger warning on this. I'm going to talk about loss in relation to a miscarriage that I had before I conceived my lovely daughter, who's now 9. So that could be slightly triggering for some people. I thought it was important to talk about this. When Karen first spoke to me about this subject that she wanted to cover in tonight's podcast, I thought, well, I haven't lost parents. Yes, my parents are still alive. My grandmother, when she died, I didn't really know her very well. So I was trying to think, who could I relate this to, or what could I relate this to? And I had a think, and I decided to kind of think about how my miscarriage affected me in the you know, when it's to do with loss, basically. And I thought I wanted to talk about it on the podcast. So before I had my daughter, I had a miscarriage, and it was very early on in my pregnancy, very, very early on, I'd say like a month or so. And I remember it like it was yesterday, though. And I remember when it happened, I just felt so alone, even though my partner at the time was kind of wanting to support me with everything happening. I felt so alone. And it was weird because I felt like everything was kind of on fast forward, a bit different than what Karen said about the world stopped. I felt like everything was on fast forward, and I couldn't really change what was happening. Something was happening to me and I couldn't change it. And everything was going whizzing on fast forward. And I just didn't know what to do. I remember in the hospital, I went to see a doctor after I'd had this miscarriage, and the doctor said, well, it's a good thing this, I'll never forget this, I just thought it was awful. He said, it's a good thing this happened, actually, because you wouldn't want that anyway. You wouldn't have wanted it anyway. I thought, wow, okay. And, you know, I'd obviously just lost the baby, even though people
Sarah,
say, okay.
Sorry, what did he mean you wouldn't have wanted it anyway?
Exactly. That's what he says. It's better, because I think when my experience of when I had the miscarriage in hospital, it was very much, I had the tone from doctors and nurses that this is normal. They said to me, 1 in 2 people will have a miscarriage, which, okay, that's obviously how it is, isn't it? This is normal. Obviously, they it's a bit like social services, I guess. I felt like they dealt with it so much, Kay, that they became emotionless and heartless towards me when I felt like I'd lost my baby. You know, and they said you wouldn't want it anyway. So I thought, wow. And I didn't even know I didn't know what to say, because I was just obviously experiencing loss. After the miscarriage ended, I felt numb and empty and on my own again. I just felt alone. And shortly after that, I got pregnant with my daughter. I think about a month after I got pregnant with my daughter. I don't think I even, you know, experienced anything else. I just got pregnant with my daughter. And when I think about it now, I think, did I even grieve the loss of my baby, really? And I don't think I did. I don't think I ever really grieved. I don't think I gave myself time to grieve. But at the same time, you know, I believe everything happens for a reason. And my daughter was obviously meant to be conceived when she was meant to be conceived. But I remember being on my own, and this is why I've said a trigger warning, guys, because it is, but I think these things need to be spoken about. I remember being on my own in King's College Hospital, in one of their gross toilets, having a miscarriage. That's the bones of it. It was horrible. And I think, I don't know if I ever dealt with that loss. I really don't know if I did. That was the main loss I've had in my life. The other loss I've had is a bit of a strange one because I was adopted. And as a child, I just remember, again, it's that same feeling of emptiness. Like I was a kind of chess piece that had been put somewhere, and kind of you go there because that's where you're meant to go. That's what it felt like. Looking back at it, I'm thinking maybe I did have a sense of loss from my birth mother. Again, I didn't grieve. So yeah, that's my experience of loss, ladies. And I think it's quite, I don't know, it's quite hard to talk about. At the same time, I think it needed to be spoken about. So yeah. Kay, what's your experiences of loss?
I just want to say also, Sarah, thank you for sharing that, because I know that was difficult topic, and thank you for sharing.
No, thank you, Karen.
Yes. As I was preparing to record, I had a quick review of my life, and there has not been a decade of my life where I have not experienced significant and or traumatic loss. And I thought, I don't know what to share. I don't know how I could even compress my multiple losses in a podcast, but I'm going to speak about two losses in my 20s and in my 30s. And there's a reason for that. So already, Sarah, like you, I had miscarriages in my 20s, and trigger warning as well. I didn't grieve. The first miscarriage was quite a shock. And I think my stress response is to freeze. So I think I just went into shock. And I was absolutely devastated. Then I had a stillborn daughter at 30 weeks. And that was absolutely traumatic. The medical professionals in this country totally agree. I know now why Black maternal death rates are so high, because I was presenting for weeks with symptoms of preeclampsia, and the GP kept saying I needed to cut salt out of my diet. It was my Jamaican diet that was too spicy, too salty, that was causing me to swell up. He didn't do his due diligence, and the baby died, and I had to give birth to her. I had to labor and give birth to her knowing she wouldn't open her eyes. And when I look back at how unfeeling and uncaring that doctor was, apart from the midwife, who for me was an angel because she was from St. Catherine, Jamaica, it just made such a difference to have a Black midwife with me for the delivery. I felt really, really isolated with my loss. And they put me on a ward with mothers who had given birth to children who were alive and crying. And I was on the ward listening to them with their babies, and just felt this huge emptiness, aching arms, breast milk beginning to come in. It was horrific. I couldn't wait to get home. But like you, Karen, I then had a moment of getting home from the hospital and seeing mothers everywhere with prams. It was almost like an assault. And I'm like, well, why have they got to keep their babies and mine isn't? I lost my faith then, but I was so angry. And I'll never forget going into the chemist who had supported me all through my pregnancy with all my prescriptions. And as you would, she went, "Oh my gosh, you've had the baby. Congratulations. What did you have?" And I could have just died right there, because I had to tell her I didn't have a baby. And she was lovely. But for a good 2 years after that, I would say, I was like, why are people smiling? Why are people in the park laughing? Similar to you, Karen, when your dad passed. I'm like, what do you mean life goes on? I didn't go back to work. I just couldn't make sense of it. it was quite a shocking grief, and I felt like my body had betrayed me. And I don't know if that's something you can relate to, Sarah, but I felt like my body had absolutely betrayed me by not giving me a heads up that the baby was in distress. I know now I had preeclampsia. I know now that that's why she died. But at the time, up until the autopsy came back, I was just in a world of weirdness and darkness. And it felt like my world had stopped and everybody has carried on. And I would just burst into tears every time I saw a pregnant woman or a pram going down the street. So I kind of hid for about 2 years and then thought, time to go back to work. This isn't doing me any good. So I went back to work, and that did help. But for women who have experienced baby loss, I understand the sense of isolation because it's not something people are terribly comfortable talking about. Of all the network around me, only one person, my ex-husband's friend at the time, would remember her birthday every year. And he would message me. Because I then went on to have children. It's almost as if people thought, well, your son should make up for her, or, so she wasn't acknowledged, not in a meaningful way. So it was always me on the 1st of October every year, holding her in mind, crying, missing her, wondering what she would have been like, so forth, so on. There's an isolation that comes with baby loss that feels different to other losses. But that's my experience anyway. So how did I cope? Well, I didn't, actually. I think I cried solidly for 2 years. I don't remember eating. Apart from going to the cemetery every day to visit her, I don't remember what I did. So I can't say I coped. When I went back to church, I didn't feel like I belonged there anymore. It probably was the going back to work that pulled me out of that dark place. And then just hope that I would have a live birth one day. And then I did. So, and as a side note, we did sue the GP for medical negligence. The complaint was upheld. He was reprimanded by the General Medical Council and then retired shortly after. By the time we got to court, he was no longer practicing. I felt this, I think that gave me something. And my son was one by then. So I felt like I had closure for her. But it was really difficult to get any support at all.
Again, thank you for sharing that, Kay. Like I said to Sarah, this is such a raw topic. It's so, it must be so painful to think about that again. So thanks for sharing it. I saw a documentary advertised about a report that they've done through the NHS about the neglect of Black women.
Yeah, I could have died.
Yeah, in labour.
I should have died. My blood pressure, 228 over 180. When I walked myself to the surgery saying, I haven't felt the baby move in 2 days. I think I have preeclampsia because I read it in W.H. Smith. I could have died. I should have died. That blood pressure is not something you should recover from.
Shocking. Honestly, I'm just shocked and appalled at that treatment, the treatment that you received. And so many other Black women receive in the healthcare service. It's just absolutely shocking.
Can I just say, to give people hope, I had, with my daughter, I had the best treatment. I couldn't ask. It was like it was private. I had the best treatment. I had the best midwife. I remember she was an African lady, and she said, just listen to me. Because obviously, when you have your first child, you're frantic.
Yes.
Just frantic. I don't want this. I don't want that. And she said, just listen to me. She said, I have 6 children. You need to listen to me, okay? And I did. I think that calmed me right down. But from the minute I conceived Naya, for the GP, right up until I gave birth to my daughter. So I had that amazing African midwife. And then another midwife came in. She was a young Caucasian lady, and she looked about 21. I thought, she's not going to be able to help me. Tell you what, she was as good as the African midwife. She was so good. That was at King's College. And I remember after I had my daughter, I went back in with chocolates and cards for the midwives, because that service, I couldn't fault them. I might as well have paid money to go privately. So I just want people to know, yes, there's appalling treatment of Black women out there, but there's also some really good midwives, some really good birth experiences. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I have to second that. To be fair, I'm very, very fortunate. I'm very, very lucky. I had really positive experiences with both my girls. I guess it does really depend on where you are. I mean, the thing is, it shouldn't really have to depend, should it? It should across the board. And I think that's what is so troubling. But like you, Sarah, I had very, very positive experiences. And, I've gone back in to say thank you. Yeah.
I did as well for my son. And I had an African midwife who pulled a double shift to make sure she was there when he was born. And it was really lovely. I latched onto her for dear life.
You need that, don't you?
Yeah.
Hanging on, because they're there when you're so vulnerable.
Yeah.
I don't think a woman could be any more vulnerable when she's giving birth to life.
Exactly. And to have someone who looks like me and someone who I thought, yes, you'll understand me if I say I'm in pain.
That's
you
right.
don't have these assumptions that Black women can bear more pain than white women.
That's right.
It was just wonderful. And I did go back in with flowers too. And I have a picture of her with my son. And every now and again, we go through his album and I go, that was your midwife. It's
amazing.
Really nice. Yeah. So yes, you're right, Sarah. There are positive stories and you can heal from baby loss. I would say, because it's already so isolating, maybe don't isolate yourself anymore like I did. Do go back into your community. Do allow your friends to support you. There is hope.
Yeah. Thanks for that. The other thing I wanted to talk about along the topic of loss is, I don't know about you ladies, but over the past couple of years, I have experienced loss, not from people who are particularly close to me, but people I know well, associates, colleagues, friends, really, people that, I've worked with and that kind of thing. But they're all around my age, which is what has become, I don't know, just so raw for me. So, for example, there was a lady I worked with. She was my TA, same age as me. We didn't really keep in touch, but I used to see on Facebook, saw her children, that kind of thing. So one day on Facebook, I saw, her daughter put something up and said, rest in peace, mum, or something. And I was just in shock. I was in shock because we worked together a couple of years ago. She was fine. And I think because she is my age, it just made me think about the fragility of life. Just how fragile we are. And I don't know why it was so impactful, but Shortly after that, a cousin of mine, again, a good person, somebody I got on really well with. I didn't live in the same area, so he lives in my hometown of Bristol. But he was a lovely person. We got on. I would go down at Christmas, go to his house. Whenever I was in Bristol, we would go out for drinks, hang out. A couple of years older than me, a few years older than me, passed away. This is very recently. So I've just been astounded, really, by loss and what that means and what that means to me in my life, because we just don't know. I mean, some people have lost their lives due to COVID related incidents, but some not. Some people have passed that I've heard of, quite suddenly. And I think that's what I find so difficult, because you can't necessarily prepare for it. I feel as if I'm here today and I don't know what tomorrow brings. And it really made me look at my life, how I want to live the rest of it, that's just something that's really, really played on my mind, ladies. I don't know about you.
I was thinking, Karen, as you were talking, that's another huge loss for our community, particularly those of us in the diaspora. During COVID, we couldn't grieve and have our funeral ritual the way we normally would. And I felt that so deeply. I remember late November, December, I had 4 Zoom funerals in the space of 2 weeks. My uncle, a very good friend, someone I grew up with, and my friend's dad. And all of them were upsetting, but you had restrictions at funerals. You had COVID regulations to contend with. For a long time, nobody could fly to Jamaica for funerals, or even if the loved one died in Jamaica, they couldn't go. And that's horrific for us. And I feel that loss just as keenly as I feel the death of those close to me, because one thing I know we do well is a funeral ritual. We have the 9 night, if some people still keep that tradition.
Yeah.
But we also have huge funerals, and there is this huge outpouring of shared grief where you don't get that in a 20-minute ceremony in the Creme.
No.
You know, there isn't the eating and the drinking and the being together afterwards. Again, a shared experience. There was none of that. And I really, really miss that. And for those of you who have lost people in lockdown, I really feel for you if you had to watch funerals on Zoom. I find them quite grim. I'm glad that that's over, because for me, particularly my good friend who was buried in London, I was like, well, he hasn't really died, because how can I know for sure that was him in the coffin? Because there was no open casket. Again, something very traditional and cultural for us is the open casket. And there was none of that. So for a long time, I told myself he wasn't dead. And then I dreamt about him, and he came to me in my dream to say goodbye. So I thought, okay, he's gone, and I've had my goodbye. The other loss I wanted to talk about was my sister, which is quite a significant and life-changing loss. And you're right, Karen, losing a pet doesn't prepare you for losing a family member, because even though we knew she would die, she had cancer and she was in treatment for 5 years. And I had a chance to say goodbye, went to Jamaica, spent some time with her, went to the funeral, felt like, okay, I've accepted, you know. But then that's another loss, because I came back here and all my family were there. So they could grieve together, they could see her grave together. And I was here on my own. And I'll not forget, 2 months after was when I had my first client in placement. Sarah, you'll know what I'm talking about. When you're kind of training as a counselor, you have to have a placement to do your client work. And I had my first client in a hospice, interestingly. And I called her to tell her, because she was so supportive when I changed careers, only to hear her voicemail and hear her voice. And just as I was about to go, you wouldn't believe, I thought, oh my God, she's dead. And I went into a 2-month blackout, just operated on muscle memory. I don't know what the kids ate. I don't know what I did, apart from set alarms, go to bed, get up, take the kids to school, set alarm, go back to bed. That was dark, those 2 months of the reality hitting. And, you know, with grief, it's not linear. It would be nice if we went through all the stages of grief and tick, 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 done that. I have felt angry. I have felt shock. I'm in denial. I've bargained. I've accepted. Done. Grief isn't linear. It's cyclical. So there were moments 5 years after her death when I've gone, she's not here. So I've gone right back to shock, as if it hadn't happened 5 years ago. When we grieve, I mean, I suppose the question is coping with loss. How do you cope? Be gentle with yourself, because you're going to go in cycles of acceptance, and then you can go right back to feeling angry. Why did this happen? Why did this happen to me? You can go to shock. I cannot believe they're not here. And do the funeral ritual. For me, I find that really, really comforting.
Karen, what you were saying, in fact, thank you, Kay. Karen, what you were saying, I think kind of played on my mind when you were saying about the fragility of life. And I have a family member who shall remain nameless for the sake of this podcast. And that, you ladies know this, so that family member had quite a few issues with alcohol, and subsequently ended up in hospital. They fell over, and from drinking huge amounts of alcohol one night, and ended up in a hospital, and I had to go in and see them linked up to all these tubes on a hospital bed. And it was so, I felt like that time, if they'd fallen a different way, if they hadn't got the help they got, if they went to hospital even I don't know, a few minutes later, I could have lost that family member. They could have died. And then I'd have to go and ID the body. And it's times like that when you just feel, my God, this person that's been in my life, my whole life has just bang, gone. And I was just thinking, how would I get my head around that? I don't know how I get my head around that. I think I'd want to, like you'd want to know if a family member's going to pass. Like you went over, Kay, you spent time with your sister. I'd have wanted that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to be like, have a dreaded phone call one day. Oh, by the way, Sarah, this person's just passed just now. I think it's
horrible.
Yeah. So when I saw them lying in a hospital bed, linked up to all these tubes, everything beeping, they had no idea I was there. I just thought, oh God, that's the closest I've come to losing them. And it could happen to anyone, and it's so quick, and they've gone. So yeah, it just made me think. That's all, ladies. Yeah,
absolutely. It does make you think. Yeah, it could have gone another way, couldn't it? It feels as if we're on borrowed time. And I just think, by the grace of God go I. Each day I just have to be thankful I didn't have to wake up, but I'm awake. Yeah, and I'm just more mindful, I suppose, and a bit more reflective, perhaps. Yeah.
I had a question for you, ladies. How do you grieve? How do you cope? How do you grieve?
Karen, go on.
No, I was just going to say something in regards to what you said, Sarah, about having some preparation, knowing that the person is going to pass, as opposed to it being quite instantaneous. So my dad was diagnosed with cancer, I think it was August. And I remember I was in a telephone box, that's how long ago this was, called my mum, and she told me, and I just felt the blood drain from my body, just hearing that word, cancer. And so he was ill for quite a short time. So we found out in August, and it was already stage, I don't know what stage that is, but it was obviously very far gone. And then by the October, he passed. I guess, yes, there was some benefit in knowing, so that we could, I don't know if you can even call that preparation, really. Can I call that preparing? Because the truth is, I don't think you can. When the day came when he really did pass, it was still traumatic. It was still shock. It was still raw. It was still painful. It was all of the above. So I don't know if it helped that we knew. I can't tell you. I mean, that's just my experience, isn't it? I have nothing to compare it to. I can't say what it would be like if we had no preparation time. And I think that, like I say, grief is so different for everyone. I think everybody experiences it so differently. There isn't a rule book. There is no kind of recipe to get through it. And as you say, Kate, there are so many emotions, and it's a cycle. So I don't know how how do you prepare for it? You can't. How do you grieve well? Like you said, just give yourself time, and allow yourself to feel what you feel. Allow yourself to feel the anger. Allow yourself to feel the pain. Allow yourself to feel what you need. I would say surround yourself. See, I would say surround yourself with people who are supportive, but there may be times when you want to be alone, and allow yourself that time to be alone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think everything you said is really important. And I think for me, it's been about giving myself time, just giving myself time. I mean, my daughter, she's 9 now, and I still remember being in that toilet at King's College Hospital, so it's almost like that's a little frozen memory in time. It was I felt like I was losing everything in that toilet. I was losing it all. It was horrible. It's a horrible experience, actually. And don't speak about it. I don't really think about it. I haven't really thought about it much, actually, until this episode. So I think just giving yourself time. Also, because I'm aware of the grief cycle, that helps me, because I deal a lot with clients that have experienced loss. I mean, I'm not a grief counsellor, but I'm very aware if someone is grieving. You know, I can see them going through the stages. And I think it's good to know that if I'm feeling a certain way about something, and I have experienced loss in other ways that I haven't discussed here on the podcast, that I am aware that I am grieving. I'm aware of the loss, and I'm kind to myself about it. I don't beat myself up about it. I don't say I should get over it by now, because who's to say, you know, someone should get over it in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, you know, you're always going to remember that person. You always will. So yeah, I think for me, it's about time, being kind to myself, and just being aware. I always say awareness is key. So yeah, that's how I deal with it.
So I spent 5 years working in children's and adults hospice. So to answer your question, Karen, yeah, I think I can prepare. I have been with people at the end of their lives. It's quite a privilege. And I've learned a lot about how to do it well, if you like. Not that there's a right or wrong way to do it. The way you grieve is the way you grieve, the end. But what have I taken away from those years of being immersed in loss? It's that loss is universal. It's something we're all going to experience at some point. And it might not be a big loss, i.e. the death of someone. It could be loss of your identity. It could be loss of your culture. For those of us in the diaspora, leaving our homeland is a loss, and adjusting to a new space is a loss. So for me, my preparation is, I know I'm going to have to grieve again, because people will die. That my parents may die before me. My children, God forbid, may die before me. So that's my preparation. I am going to have to grieve again. There have been losses that have felt unbearable. And that's when I was in therapy. And what I needed from my therapist was to be a witness. It's almost like having a witness to the suffering, because it felt unbearable. So I would recommend therapy. Of course I would, because the mourning process, you're living, it's a duality to it. So, you know, Karen, you talked earlier about feeling like your world had ended and the rest of the world had carried on. But that's exactly it. It's a duality to it. Your world has ended, your world as you know it, but you still have to live in the world with everyone else. And
oh, we've just lost Kay.
feeling traumatized. It's so nice.
We've got her back.
Oh my goodness. Where did I cut off, Sarah?
You lost about the last 30 seconds of you.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't even notice. My apologies. I hadn't even noticed, that it had gone off. Where was I? I was saying, for me, accessing memory. So I can hear my sister's voice in my ear. She had the funniest sayings. So when I miss her sometimes, I look on her pictures. I remember her saying, I call my other siblings and we have a good old laugh about what she was like, her character. Pictures are really important to me, so I do hold them in mind. I do rituals like lighting candles, or naming flowers or plants in my garden. Yeah, I do a whole ritual, because I've finally accepted that loss is going to come again. So when I tense and I'm frightened of it, that's when I get anxious and I dread it. But if I'm relaxed into it as much as a human being can, and I tell myself, you've grieved again, you've grieved before, you can do it again, then that makes it a little easier on the mind.
Yeah, I hear that, Karen. I totally do. I was also thinking about other kinds of loss. So the end of a marriage, that's loss. And perhaps that's a podcast for another day. Divorce. Yeah, divorce or sort of significant breakups. Yeah, perhaps we can discuss that at a later date. But I just wanted to say thank you both ladies for sharing your stories. And And thank you everyone for listening. Any final words you want to say, Sarah, okay?
I just want to say, make sure you follow us on Instagram, guys. We're at Beautifully Melanated Podcast, and also Beautifully Melanated Podcast at gmail.com. Please feel free to email us any kind of suggestions you guys have as well for future episodes. Always very welcome for that. That's about it. Kay, any last words from yourself?
Yeah, just to echo what you've both said. Our Instagram page has profiles of us now. Mine and Sarah's are Karen's coming. So do interact with the host profile on Instagram. Do send in your feedback, your comments, your questions. This episode might evoke, of course, your own experiences of loss and grief. So I would urge you to really look after yourself in any way you need to. If after listening to our stories, you are in touch with your own loss, please look after yourself.
Very good point. Really good point, Kay, because it was a really strong episode, and I hope that the listeners got something out of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Right.
See you next time.
We are beautifully